Every time prices rise, and they always rise, most Americans watch their savings by a little less. Saudi families watch theirs by a little more. That is not luck. That is not oil money. That is a sequence. 5 specific moves made in a specific order the moment inflation signals appear. You are feeling those signals right now. Every trip to the grocery store. Every utility bill that comes in higher than the last one. Every time you run the numbers and they come out slightly worse than they did 6 months ago. 62% of retirees admit they have no idea how long their savings will last. That number does not surprise me. What surprises me is that anyone expects a different outcome from a system that was never designed to protect them from what is happening right now. Social Security benefits lost 20% of their buying power between 2010 and 2024. 20%. Gone quietly. No announcement. No apology. Just a number that buys less every year while the institutions that created the mechanism that caused it continue operating without consequence. I watched that mechanism be built. I know exactly how it works. And I know the 5 moves that protect against it, because my family has been making them for over 100 years. If this channel is giving you something you have not found anywhere else, subscribe. There is more coming. Most Americans experience inflation the way they experience weather. Something that arrives from outside. Something that happens to them. A force without an author. That framing is not accidental. Inflation has an author. It has a mechanism. And understanding that mechanism is the first step toward understanding why Saudi families respond to inflation while ordinary Americans simply absorb it. Here is the truth in plain language. Inflation is a transfer. Every dollar of inflation moves real purchasing power from the person who saved to the institution that borrowed. When a government runs a deficit and prints money to cover it, the new currency enters circulation and dilutes the value of every dollar already held by every saver in the system. The government's debt becomes easier to service. The saver's purchasing power quietly disappears. The Federal Reserve manages that mechanism. It sets the conditions under which inflation accelerates or slows. It controls the interest rate environment that determines whether your savings account keeps pace with rising prices or falls behind them. For 50 years, ordinary American savers have been on the losing side of that mechanism. Not because they made bad decisions. Because the mechanism was designed to benefit borrowers, primarily governments and large financial institutions, at the direct expense of people who saved. Saudi families understood this 50 years ago. They built their entire wealth protection system around one simple insight. Do not hold the thing that gets diluted. Hold the things that cannot be diluted. That insight produces 5 specific moves. Made in order. Every time inflation rises. The moment inflation signals appear, Saudi families convert excess cash into physical gold. Not a gold ETF. Not a paper certificate representing gold held somewhere else by someone else. Physical gold. Bars and coins held directly. In possession. Requiring no counterparty to maintain their value. In the first quarter of 2025, gold demand in Saudi Arabia jumped 35% year over year. During the same period, global gold demand dropped 21%. While the rest of the world was moving away from gold, Saudi families were accelerating their purchases. Investment-grade gold demand, specifically bars and coins, grew 15% year over year. More Saudi families stocking safes with physical metal. Not as a speculative bet. As a response to a signal they have been trained across generations to recognize. Now I want to explain something that most Americans never get a clear answer on. The difference between physical gold and paper gold. When an American financial advisor recommends gold exposure, they almost always recommend a gold ETF. An exchange-traded fund that tracks the price of gold. On paper, the performance looks similar. When gold prices rise, the ETF rises. When gold prices fall, the ETF falls. But there is a critical structural difference. A gold ETF is a promise. It is a financial instrument backed by gold held in a vault by an institution. During normal market conditions, that distinction is invisible. During genuine inflationary crises, the periods when gold protection matters most, that distinction becomes everything. In a severe inflationary environment, financial institutions face liquidity pressure. Paper instruments face counterparty risk. The institution holding the gold in the vault is subject to exactly the same systemic pressures that are causing the crisis. Physical gold in your possession is subject to none of them. It exists completely independently of any institution's solvency. That independence is precisely what Saudi families are buying when they convert cash to physical gold. Not price exposure. Institutional independence. Your advisor recommended the ETF because the ETF fits inside a managed account. Physical gold does not. Physical gold removes you from the system entirely. That removal is the protection. The second move follows directly from the first principle. Do not hold things that inflate away. Hold things that inflate with the economy. Land is the only major asset class that reliably inflates with the broader price level rather than against the holder. When inflation rises, the nominal value of land rises with it. The family that holds land during an inflationary period does not lose purchasing power. They gain it as their asset rises alongside the prices eroding their neighbors' cash savings. Saudi families accelerate land acquisition the moment inflation signals appear. Not after inflation has already run. At the signal. The timing matters. By the time inflation is visible in headlines and felt in grocery stores, the most significant price adjustments in land markets have often already begun. Old money families move at the signal. Ordinary savers move, if they move at all, after the opportunity has already compressed. Now look at what the average American retiree holds instead of land. A home with a mortgage. The mortgage is a critical distinction. A mortgaged home is not owned outright. It is a leveraged position in real estate with a bank holding a legal claim on the underlying asset. During inflationary periods that create economic stress, job losses, forced liquidations, tightening credit, that bank's claim does not disappear. It remains. The family that owns land outright holds something real regardless of what financial institutions decide. The family servicing a mortgage holds a leveraged position in an asset they do not fully control. One holds land. The other holds a promise to eventually hold land if everything goes correctly. Those are not the same thing. And 40 years of American financial culture treated them as if they were. The third move addresses the most common mistake ordinary savers make during inflationary periods. Leaving money in interest-bearing accounts. Savings accounts. Certificates of deposit. Fixed income instruments. These products share one structural characteristic. They pay a fixed or near-fixed rate of return denominated in the same currency that inflation is eroding. When inflation runs at 7% and your savings account pays 2%, you are not earning 2%. You are losing 5% per year in real purchasing power. Guaranteed. Buy the account you believed was protecting your savings. Saudi families move savings out of interest-bearing instruments and into commodity-linked income during inflationary periods. Energy royalty trusts. Pipeline income instruments. Resource-linked income streams. These instruments share a different structural characteristic. Their income rises when commodity prices rise. When energy prices rise due to inflationary pressure, the distributions from energy royalty instruments rise with them. The saver holding an interest-bearing account at 2% watches inflation outpace their return. The holder of an energy royalty instrument watches their distributions rise alongside the same inflationary pressure eroding everyone else's savings. One instrument was designed to trail inflation. The other was designed to move with the forces causing it. American financial advisors know both instruments exist. They recommend the first category reliably and consistently. The reason is the same as it always is. Interest-bearing accounts and managed fixed income instruments generate ongoing advisory relationships and fee structures. Royalty income flows directly to the asset holder. There is nothing to manage. There is no ongoing fee. There is no reason for the advisory system to direct you toward an instrument that removes you from the advisory system. This is the move that surprises people the most. Common financial wisdom in America says that inflation benefits borrowers. The logic sounds reasonable on the surface. If you borrowed $100,000 and inflation rises, you repay that debt in dollars that are worth less than the dollars you borrowed. The real burden of the debt inflates away. That logic is taught in classrooms. It is repeated by financial commentators. And it contains a critical flaw that old money families recognized a long time ago. The theory assumes you remain in control of your assets throughout the inflationary period. It does not account for what happens when inflationary periods create economic volatility, market disruptions, tightening credit, forced liquidations, that put pressure on leveraged positions precisely when they are most vulnerable. Saudi families eliminate dollar-denominated debt the moment inflation signals appear. Not because they ignore the theoretical benefit of inflation to borrowers. Because they have watched what happens to families who hold hard assets inside leveraged positions during volatile inflationary periods. A family that holds land with a mortgage attached faces a different risk profile than a family that holds land outright. If the volatile period that accompanies inflation creates cash flow pressure, reduced income, rising costs, unexpected expenses, the family with debt may be forced to service that debt by liquidating assets at precisely the wrong moment. The family with no debt faces no such pressure. Their assets cannot be forced into liquidation. They hold. They wait. They emerge from the inflationary period with their asset base intact. The leveraged family may not. Old money does not use inflation as a borrowing opportunity. Old money uses inflation as a signal to eliminate every obligation that could force an involuntary asset sale. That distinction between theoretical benefit and structural risk is something the American financial culture that profits from debt never explains clearly. The fifth move is the one that separates families that preserve wealth for one generation from families that preserve it for 10. Saudi families do not simply accumulate assets. They formalize those assets into structures designed to transfer them across generations without triggering the tax and legal events that destroy American inherited wealth. Family trusts. Holding structures. Asset consolidation mechanisms that keep wealth inside the family unit across transitions that would otherwise expose it to estate taxes, probate costs, and legal fragmentation. The average American family that accumulates meaningful wealth over a lifetime exposes that wealth to significant erosion at every generational transition. Estate taxes. Probate. Legal disputes between heirs. Assets that were held as a unified block during the accumulating generation getting fragmented and diluted in the transferring generation. American estate attorneys know how to build structures that prevent this. They know the instruments. They know the mechanisms. What they almost never do is walk into a client relationship and proactively explain the full architecture of multi-generational wealth transfer. They respond to questions. They draft what they are asked to draft. They do not volunteer the complete picture to a client who does not already know what questions to ask. Saudi families know what questions to ask because the answers have been passed down across generations as explicitly as the assets themselves. The structure is considered as important as what it holds. Because a family that accumulates physical gold, land, and commodity income across a lifetime and then loses 30 to 50% of it in a single generational transition did not actually preserve wealth. They preserved it for one generation and then surrendered it to a system that was waiting at the transfer point. Old money families seal the transfer point. That is the fifth move. 5 moves. One principle underneath all of them. Inflation is not something that happens to Saudi families. It is a signal that tells them exactly what to do next. The moment ordinary Americans begin feeling inflation as an unavoidable force eroding their savings, Saudi families are already executing a sequence they have rehearsed across generations. Convert cash to physical gold. Accelerate land acquisition. Move savings into commodity-linked income. Eliminate dollar-denominated debt. Formalize assets into multi-generational transfer structures. 5 moves. Made in order. Before the inflationary period reaches its peak. That gap, between the moment inflation is felt and the moment a response is executed, is where generational wealth is either protected or surrendered. Most Americans feel inflation for months or years before they change anything. The system they were raised inside trained them to absorb it rather than respond to it. That training served the system. It did not serve them. The 5 moves I've described today are not secret. They are not complicated. They are not available only to families with dynastic resources. Every single one of them is accessible to an ordinary American who understands what inflation actually is and what it signals. The reason most Americans have never executed this sequence is not capability. It is exposure. Nobody with an incentive to keep you in managed paper assets was going to walk you through the sequence that removes you from managed paper assets. That is simply how incentive structures work. In the next video, I am going to show you something more specific. How Saudi families think about the dollar itself. Not as a currency to hold. As a system to understand. And what they hold instead when they decide the dollar is not the right place to store what took a lifetime to build. The sequence continues. I will see you in the next one.